Welcome to another episode of Great Men Taking Over the World. This is Albert Wesker, and today I'm doing my top 25 Sega Genesis games countdown. The Genesis is my favorite video game system of all time, the one responsible for getting me into video games in the first place. And today, this is my honor to do this amazing list. So, let's rock and roll! Gunstar Heroes in at number 25. This is a real treasure made by treasure. This is one of those great action titles, the 16-bit era, a Genesis exclusive. I only got to play it maybe a little bit later. I remember buying the game in Funkoland probably sometime in 1998 or 1999. It was a highly ranked game. The creativity and ingenuity of this game, the variety of the game. I mean, that one level where you're rolling the dice, it was quite interesting. You just didn't see that kind of thing. The endless boss battles and the high-end, high-impact two-player co-op mode. This is one of those Genesis games that everybody talks about, and I would say it's up there, man. I couldn't leave it off this list. This is a true 16-bit classic. Dude, Eternal Champions. This is a game that we played the crap out of back in the day. The originality of this game, I have to admit, I mean, obviously it's not as good as Street Fighter 2, it's not as good as Mortal Kombat 2. So what? Look at the 16-bit fighting game landscape of the time. Eternal Champions was original, unique, visually wonderful, amazing character design, amazing world building, amazing music. That Blade stage was freaking awesome, dude. Did you hear those beats? And the Xavier stage, that Salem witch trial stuff. I mean, look at the character design, the spooky atmosphere. You're telling me this is not a good game? Some people rag on it. I think you're completely wrong. This is an amazing freaking game. Don't tell me that it's not good. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. This is greatness incarnate. Now, the Sega CD version was even better. There was so many more characters. There's so much more content. So many more fatalities and stage fatalities and Cinekills. Of course, the Sega CD version takes the cake, but this is where it all began, the Genesis game, because it was truly a unique one, and I wholeheartedly recommend it for all Genesis fans. Contra Hardcore. This is a game that I was talked about back in the day a lot. Everybody mentioned it and its difficulty level and its insane action, and I never played it back in the day. I wanted to, it just didn't get around to it. And I played it decades later on the Genesis Mini, and I gotta tell you, this is one of the most impressive 16-bit action titles ever made. It absolutely is better than the Contra 3, the Alien Wars for Super Nintendo. Konami pulled out all the stops for this one. It's a visual explosion, high impact. The visual effects in this game are some of the most impressive of any 16-bit game. I was just floored with the insanity of the action. Obviously, the North American version, they pumped up the difficulty level to an insane degree for some reason. You have almost no lives, it continues, so it's almost unplayable, except for if you're an expert gamer. I prefer to play the Japanese version, and that one's very easy to access if you have the Genesis Mini. You just change the language settings to Japanese, and then you have all the Japanese games. The only thing different is that you get more lives and more continues, just more tries to, get a handle on this monster of a game. It's a ridiculously impressive game. So fun to play as a one-player experience or as a two-player experience. I highly recommend it for anyone who is into action games. This is definitely one of the best. Aladdin. Now, I talked a lot about Disney games in my honorable mentions, right? But the one I did not talk about was Aladdin, and there's a particular reason, because it's a fucking great game. Because it's one of the few Disney games that I actually liked a lot. And man, it is a sublime platformer, absolutely terrific gameplay. The visuals, the animation, it's just gorgeous. The soundtrack is pitch perfect, right on the money with the movie. Obviously, I was a big fan of the movie, and this game did not disappoint whatsoever. This is one of the best-selling Genesis games of all time. And with good reason. Every single movie had a game back then. Every single silly movie, including Judge Dredd, including Cliffhanger. Sylvester Stallone. It's not like that nowadays with AAA titles, right? Every movie back then got a AAA title, sort of. They were just cranking them out for cheap, easy money. But this is one of those games that they really did full justice to compared to the film. This is a great Genesis classic, and it's highly recommendable to this day. Do not miss out on Aladdin from Sega. It's way better than the Capcom Aladdin on the Super NES. I would say this is one of those games that everybody still loves to this day. Streets of Rage 3 has quite a long history with me. This is a game that I wanted back in the day. It was just one of those things that we couldn't afford. There was too many games on the menu. I only played it years later, and then obviously owned it on the multiple compilations that came out. In many ways, it's an improvement on Streets of Rage 2, which was a complete masterpiece. And in some ways, it kind of goes a little bit lower than Streets of Rage 2. Obviously, the biggest flaw is the musical soundtrack. I mean, it's not that bad. It just doesn't gel well with the Streets of Rage, especially the amazing soundtracks we had in Part 1 and Part 2. The level design is fantastic. You even have to do things that you didn't in the earlier games. I mean, you have to backtrack. You have to find things. There's a story mode. Special moves in this game, they were hyped up even further than Part 2. I love the dash. It's just everything about the gameplay is just a little bit better than Streets of Rage 2. And yet, I think the game suffers because it's not that huge of a leap, right? It's more of the same, but with a shit soundtrack, right? Because Streets of Rage 2 was such a massive leap over Part 1 that Part 3 was more of the same, but then it had some detrimentals to it. So once again, I mean, I think it's an amazing game and a must-play for anyone who's into beat-em-ups, because this is one of the greatest beat-em-ups of all time, a must-play Sega classic. And I wholeheartedly recommend it. It's just not as good as Part 2. Castlevania Bloodlines. Wow, this is a hardcore Castlevania game. Look, I was not a Castlevania fan back in those days. I didn't know anything about it. I never played these games. The first Castlevania experience I had was Symphony of the Night for PlayStation. And now going back in time and finally playing Castlevania Bloodlines for the Genesis, I was like, man, I mean, everybody was loving this back in the 90s, and I just didn't know about it. I mean, I knew about it, I just wasn't particularly drawn to it. There were so many other games to play at the time. Now looking back on it, man, this is one game that I really missed out on back in the 16-bit days. Gorgeous atmosphere, intense, beautiful music, stunning visual effects. I mean, the whole Castlevania experience, it's the absolute monumental Castlevania experience, and it's for the Genesis, and I did not get to play it back in the 90s. It's just one of those games that kind of passed me by. I had to come back to it all these years later and look back and I'm like, damn, Sega, you were a beast. Konami, you were a beast. 90s gaming at its best. Mortal Kombat 3. You have no idea how big a deal Mortal Kombat 3 was in 1995. We were going to get it for the home consoles. All the kids in the neighborhood were hyping this up. We were ready for part 3. We were going insane. We already dabbled with it in the arcade. Now we're gonna have it at home? Are you out of your mind? Mortal Kombat 3 and Ultimate MK3? Cabal, and he was my favorite character in part 3. Everything about this translation was for the Genesis was even better than part 2 actually, because part 2 had a few detrimentals to it in the sound department. Part 3, they really corrected it. It's a really good translation. Obviously that's not the PlayStation version, hello, but the PlayStation had that horrible slowdown with Shang Tsung's transformations, morphing. Nothing like that in 16-bit games, man. Dude, we were playing the crap out of this in fall of 1995. I was ready. I got my fatalities. I think I got it in GamePro or something, and I just had them. You know, I'm just a little kid, right? And there was an older guy. He was like a high school guy. He was like, "Oh, hey, man, you got the fatalities, right?" I was like, "Yes, I do." And he's like, "Yeah, how about giving me those fatalities?" Like, no, I think I'm gonna keep them to myself.
Flawless victory fatality.
Oh, so you're like that? Yes, man, I'm an immature kid. All right, immature kids, they're not gonna share their fatalities with you, dude. I ain't giving my motherfucking fatalities to you, motherfucker. I'm keeping it for myself. I'm doing my crazy Dark Assassin impersonation there. Dude, the game was legendary. Mortal Kombat series, a 90s classic, part 3 on the Genesis. Oh, we had a blast with it. Damn, this game was a lot of fun. A lot of fun.
Finish him.
Shinobi 3, Return of the Ninja Master. A strange history with this game for me. I played it back in the day and over the years, and I could never really get into it. It took me a while. I don't know why, because I totally got into Revenge of Shinobi, and I was really enthralled with that game, but something about Shinobi 3 was just like, okay, it's super appealing on the surface, but maybe it was the difficulty level. Some of the stages were kind of annoying. But over the years, I kept playing it, and I kept giving it a shot. I was like, damn, this game is great. It's one of the greatest Sega games out there. I just got more and more enthralled with it. It has an amazing soundtrack from Yuzo Koshiro, of course. The Shinobi aesthetic itself is fundamentally amazing because it has the classic traditional Japanese aesthetics and the ninja vibe, and then you mix that with modern landscapes, modern metropolises, modern technologies, cyber ninjas, and all this kind of stuff. This game has a lot of experimentational stuff in it. Amazing bosses, amazing levels. You know, everybody remembers the horse riding scene and the surf scene, surf ninja shit. This is... It's a pretty crazy mixture of different elements, isn't it? The sci-fi elements with the traditional Japanese feudal thing. Everybody who's a Sega fan obviously knows that Shinobi is the bomb. It's awesome. This is a masterpiece in many ways, and I'm glad that I kept giving it more and more of a chance, and I got into the gameplay more and more. This is one of the great classics of that era. Sega was on point with this. One of their best titles from 1993. Vector Man. To truly appreciate the impact that Vector Man had, you had to be there in 1995. This was really Sega's answer to Donkey Kong Country, and I think the game stands the test of time better than Donkey Kong Country in very many respects. The gameplay was completely sublime, but it was the visual appeal of this game was amazing. I never seen anything like that for any Genesis game, any 16-bit game. I was so impressed. The animation is so fluid, and the lighting effects were very, very impressive. I just was completely enthralled by the game. I thought it was one of Sega's best titles. It's another series that died in the 16-bit era. They never brought Vector Man out in any other capacity. I thought it would have been an amazing 32-bit game. It would have been an amazing Dreamcast game if they could do a 3D Vector Man. And how about that shooting from his hands? It was just so natural. I just loved running around. It was a great shooter and platformer, and there was an element of exploration to it. I think Vector Man is a great classic, and Sega really needs to bring this back. This series deserves so much more than just 2 games back in the 90s. Phantasy Star 4. Wow. This was the great RPG to play if you were a Sega owner. I was not an RPG fan at that time. I got into the genre during the PlayStation era. But looking back on it and going back to the huge, massive story, the sci-fi, obviously, elements of it, the anime-inspired art style, just the huge scope of the whole thing is incredibly impressive. If I played this game back in the 90s when it was relevant, I would be putting this game in the top 10 or probably much higher in the list. Nowadays, playing these kind of old RPGs is a little bit more difficult and time-consuming, and the endless random battles and the grind fests that they are, it's not as palatable to a modern audience. But at that time, this is all people had, and when it was done this well and gave you so much bang for your buck, and I think this was like $99 when it came out. One of the greatest 16-bit games of all time. If you're a JRPG fan, if you're an RPG fan, period, you know what to do. You've probably already played this game. It's one of the greatest of all time. Number 15, Super Baseball 2020. How did this baseball game get so far up the list, right? It's really high. Well, because it's freaking fun as hell. This is an amazing arcade translation, an SNK classic. You know how much fun we had playing this as a 2-player experience? We played the crap out of it. Hitting those amazing home runs. Those home run celebrations were a lot of fun, and the close-ups of all the characters and the robots and the sci-fi aesthetic was just so fun. And I mean, I've played a lot of baseball games in my time, especially during the 16-bit era. I wanted to try them out, and I kept coming back to Super Baseball 2020 because it was so colorful, so fun, so original, and just unbelievably easy to pick up and play from even newcomers. I mean, even now, people who've never played this game, they come in, they play a game with me, and they're having a blast. And the foul balls, the home runs, and the big gazungas with the chicks flying around and close-ups. Man, this game was just too much fun, guys. And it sure was fun paying that money and powering up your baseball players. Power up, baby. Wesker, you crazy. Just a little bit, yeah. Road Rash. Now this is a classic series that originated on the Sega Genesis, and this first game is a legend and a great classic. The fact that we were there, we played it back when it was relevant, is a truly great gift of gaming itself. This game was pretty much perfect, you know, the amount of strategy that you needed in this game, because you're racing for cash money and you're buying faster and faster bikes with every level, and you're trying to get better and better. And of course, you're fighting through the combat in the stages, beating people up, trying to get ahead. It was just so much fun, man. I don't think there was that many games with this kind of flavor. I mean, it's a racing game, it's a strategy game, it's a quasi-fighting game. I mean, it's a fantastic game with so much personality, so much quality. I couldn't get enough. It was really hard at the later stages because your bike is going so insanely fast, and then you're still looking, how to fight these people off and get first place to advance. And the music, how can we forget about the music? You can't forget about the music because these beats were legendary. It took a while to get used to it. I remember initially I was like, wait, what is this? Do I like this music or not? I don't know. And then eventually I just fell in love with it. No one will ever forget the legend that is Road Rash. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the Hyperstone Heist. Now, there's a lot of controversy whether this game or Turtles in Time on the Super Nintendo is the better version. I played them both. I personally prefer Hyperstone Heist. I have no problem if somebody loves Turtles in Time more. Why not play both, right? What I like about Hyperstone Heist is the massive build-up. It starts in the sewers, where every Turtles game should start, and then it progresses all the way through all these different environments and different levels until you reach the Technodrome, and you fight Krang and Super Shredder as the final boss, and I just love the massive levels and the scope of the game. This game is a true classic, the arcade experience in the home. We were huge Turtles fans, as everybody was back in the day, early 90s kids and whatever, and to have this game on the Genesis was just so much fun. This is one of the greatest beat-em-ups of all time. Just going through this game again, play through all the way, it's 45 minutes to an hour of your life, and you're having a great time with friends. I highly recommend it. Of course, it deserves this high of a spot. What an amazing, amazing game. Turtle power! Cowabunga, dude! Shredder was my favorite character in the Turtles universe. I love those villains. Mortal Kombat 2, the fall of 1994. I remember it like I was there yesterday. Mortal Kombat 2 was something we just had to absolutely play. We loved the characters. It was such a massive improvement over Mortal Kombat 1. Just gigantic, significant in the graphics department, in the character selection, and the fatalities and everything. Now, I know the Genesis version, I will admit, is not as good as the Super Nintendo version of MK2 in a few specific areas. I think the graphics are better for the Super Nintendo version, and I also say that the voice sampling, of course, there was some voice sampling that was left out of the Genesis version, and that was not faithful to the arcade translation. But the music, I prefer the Genesis version, and the gameplay, it's faster, it's smoother, it's more responsive. I prefer the Genesis version. So, I mean, there's a give and take here for both versions. We would just do those freaking fatalities over and over again. Our parents be walking around in the background, and then they look over and they see people's heads exploding or getting ripped off. Reptile eating somebody's head. It was just ridiculous, and they were like, wow, that's what kids are playing these days, huh? And they didn't care. We loved violence, and we loved violent video games. That's the kind of children we were. I think every boy from the 90s can relate to that. That violent video games were the shit. What a wonderful gift it was in the fall of 1994 to have this in the home. It deserves this high ranking on the list. The game was extremely influential and just a massively significant cultural phenomenon at the time. It was a good time, man. The 90s were pretty slick.
Finisher.
number 11, The Revenge of Shinobi. One of the best Sega games of those early years of the Genesis before Sonic the Hedgehog came out. For some reason, this game, I just accepted it right off the bat. I enjoyed it right off the bat. It's not easy, it's a challenging game, but I got into it way more than Shinobi 3, which looks and sounds and plays better if you think about it. But for some reason, Revenge of Shinobi was just easier for me to get into. And the fact that this game had such a wonderful sense of humor was also part of its charm. It had Spider-Man, it had Batman, and it had Godzilla. It had Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator in the game. All of these appearances, cameo appearances that they threw in here, had no licenses, they had no rights to them, Sega just threw them in. Of course, they had to take down, they had to obscure Batman's design, they had to take the green skin off of Godzilla, and they had to obscure some of those things. But it was just ballsy to just goof off on all these different licenses. The gameplay is quite sublime. The level design, I was really into it. This is an early Genesis game. How does it compare to early Genesis games? It's one of the best ever. In the gameplay department, it stands up to the best of the Genesis library. And even though I would admit Shinobi 3 is probably the better game overall, and certainly the far more impressive game, this game has a certain level of charm that just grabbed a hold of me right away, and this is still one of the great Sega Genesis classics out there. Go Sega, go Shinobi.
In the game.
Wow, here we are. We finally get to the top 10, and it's FIFA International Soccer, the original FIFA. Now, I know what you're saying. Oh my goodness, what's going on with these sports games ranking so high? Dude, the Genesis, Sega, was where sports gaming was at during the 16-bit era. This was incredible, a revolutionary console. And soccer, football, I just had to have a video game of this. FIFA World Cup USA 1994, one of the greatest summers of my life. We were out there, we were playing soccer all day long outside. We would come in, we'd watch the games on TV, and then there was the video game. I got it on my birthday during that summer. We never experienced animations to that level of detail back in that day. The isometric kind of view was perfect for this. The crowd chanting and the musical sequences and all this stuff, all the noises were amazing. Of course, the later versions, they became superior and superior, but this original one was so unique and so charming. Not only did it have the simulation experience, playing the whole tournament and winning the World Cup, but also the game had an arcade feel, a very easy to pick up and play kind of feel to it. So it balanced the simulation aspect with the arcade fun factor aspect. As crazy as it sounds, it's still my favorite soccer game of all time. Absolutely monumental impact back in the day, and it really made my summer of 1994 much more meaningful than it probably could have been. We played the sports outside, we watched the sports on TV, and we played the games on Sega. It could not have been a better summer. Jungle Strike. I got this game for Christmas in 1994. That was an amazing year, 1994, one of the greatest of my life, and getting this game for Christmas just made it even better. What a wonderful close to a year. It's a real-time strategy action game. We love the action in this game, we love the cinematic sequences, we love the firepower, but the strategy was where it was at. You really had to conserve your fuel, you had to conserve your ammo, you had to get more and more. You had the helicopter, the Apache helicopter, of course, but you also had the stealth fighter F-1117A. You got to have the hovercraft. It was an amazing game overall. The later levels got really, really difficult, progressively more and more difficult, and it was quite a challenging game. It took me a while to beat. It was massive. Thankfully, the password feature really helped out. Otherwise, I'd be screwed. The password feature was huge. A very intelligent game, sophisticated game, and any game where you can just blow the shit shit out of Washington and mess around with the White House. I think Bill Clinton made a cameo appearance in the game. You can kind of see him in shadow. It was pretty hilarious. Definitely a classic of that time. I really loved it. I had the time of my life with Jungle Strike. That was the best of the series on the Genesis, absolutely. Sega had the Strike series, they had the trilogy, and this one's the best one, I guarantee it. I could never get into the PlayStation ones. I gave it a shot. It was like, well, there was slightly improved graphics, but they really did not develop the gameplay at all on the PlayStation. The 16-bit era was the era of the Strike series. Phenomenal game, one of the absolute most amazing real-time strategy action games out there. Earthworm Jim. Christmas '94 was a really wonderful Christmas because I got Jungle Strike as my present. My brother got Earthworm Jim for Christmas, and we would play each other's game, and it was awesome. And I'm gonna tell you, Earthworm Jim just edges out Jungle Strike. Earthworm Jim was an exceptionally original and innovative platformer. You know, it was an action game. This game was so ridiculous, so over the top, so hilarious, and so colorful, and this sense of audacity in the humor was quite exceptional. There's a level where you're bungee jumping with a giant booger creature, and you're fighting him round after round, and it's just the most ridiculously hilarious thing you can ever think of. We totally got into it. The last level is called Buttville. That's a tough-ass level, man. This game gets progressively more difficult. There are some tougher areas, but I think the game was just so wonderfully balanced, and all the levels were so different and so intricate. That crazy hell level where you kind of go to hell, and you got Mussorgsky's Night on Bear Mountain playing as the score. The music throughout the game was amazing. I really thought this was phenomenal. One of the greatest platformers of the 2D era. You can't even remotely dismiss Earthworm Jim. I didn't like the sequel as much. It was pretty good, but I just think we got our money's worth with Earthworm Jim, the first game. This game was almost as good as any other platformer out there during the 16-bit era. It's totally competitive to the greatest of them all. Absolutely phenomenal game. 2 big thumbs up for Earthworm Jim. Super Street Fighter 2. Wow. This also came out in 1994. I'm not sure if I was able to even get it in 94. I think in early 95 or so we finally got it. Because it was quite expensive. I think it came out, it was like $69.99, so it was like insane. But we got it. I traded some kid for like some action figures or Batman or something like that, and somehow we got Super Street Fighter 2. It was awesome. It was here, and we were playing the crap out of it. The fact that we can have it at home, 16 characters, 16 different stages. We had the tournament mode. Our friends would come over, and we'd stay up for hours late at night playing those one-round tournament fights and seeing who would be the final world champion. My favorite character at the time was M. Bison. I loved, hey, I told you I love the villains, right? So I love those villains. Every single character had their own charm, and it was just a fantastic game. The sound quality was not as good as Special Champion Edition. That's the only reason I would maybe not rank this game as high as that. The sound quality was just a little bit off, and I immediately noticed that as a kid when I was playing it. We put so many hours into Street Fighter. I cannot praise this game enough because we just loved it, and we still love it to this day. Obviously, it has better home representations now. The game has been re-released dozens and dozens of times, but going back to Sega Genesis, playing it on Sega with the 6-button controller, oh my goodness, that was so much fun. Phenomenal game, 10 out of 10. Yeah, baby, come on. Sonic the Hedgehog. Now the list is really getting interesting. From now on, every single game I mentioned could have been number one. And of course, Sonic the Hedgehog could have absolutely been number one. It is one of the defining video game experiences of my life. In January 1993, we received the Sega Genesis with Sonic 1 as a pack-in game, and we played the hell out of it. This is the first video game that we ever beat. Just imagine the accomplishment of beating your first video game. Most people had no idea what Sega even was before this game came out. And then all of a sudden, everybody was getting a Sega Genesis and Sonic the Hedgehog, and it was amazing. It is a game made to play like a dream. And I'll tell ya, this game enthralled me to such an extent. I played Mario before, and Mario had not a single chance against Sonic in my mind. I was completely sold on the Blue Hedgehog immediately. The most iconic zone is, of course, Green Hill. It is amazing. It is phenomenal. My favorite zones are Starlight Zone for its peaceful, calming allure, and Scrap Brain Zone for its technological madness and insanity. It was such a fun thing to play, man. It was so fun. Labyrinth Zone does suck. It is an underwater slogfest. Everybody knows that. But the boss of Labyrinth Zone is quite amazing. I think it's one of the most interesting, probably the best boss battle in the whole game. Certainly challenging. I love Springyard Zone. That was a terrific zone. The Marble Zone, I'm not a fan. But whatever, dude. The game wasn't perfect yet. But Sonic the Hedgehog was such a sublime experience overall. I can't even find any fault with it. This is the game that was responsible, single-handedly responsible, for getting me into video games, into home console gaming in the first place. Absolutely. Before that, I gave Nintendo a shot. Oh my goodness, I gave them a shot and I had no interest in it. Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt, it was fine a little bit here and there, but man, Sonic sold me. I was like, what is this? This is amazing. This is one of the greatest things I've ever seen. We were kids. We were like looking at this. We just had to play it. We couldn't stop. It was the first video game that we ever conquered. I could have easily given this game number one on the list, but there's some few games out there still left that edge it out. But Sonic the Hedgehog, number one. 10 out of 10, baby. Yeah. Streets of Rage 2, the greatest beat-em-up of all time, whether we're talking about home video game systems or arcade classic. This is the best playing, the best feeling game I've ever played, and I've played them all. I was a huge beat-em-up fan. Probably the first beat-em-up game we had at home, and we were completely spoiled. And every time I try to play another beat-em-up, whether it was on Super Nintendo with the Final Fight, or try to play anything in the arcade like the X-Men arcade game or anything like that, or even the Ninja Turtles games, which were phenomenal, but still did not feel as fluid and perfect as Streets of Rage. Every hit connects. It feels powerful. It feels amazing. All the zones are incredible. The graphics are incredible. What a vast improvement over Streets of Rage 1. The Yuzo Koshiro soundtrack is absolutely legendary. 3 decades after it came out, it is still incomparable and timeless. This game is timeless. My goodness, I mean, it's a 10 out of 10. Might as well give it a 10 out of 10. I don't even care. Check out a review. We were smoking crack when we gave it an 8.5. We're crazy. This is a 10 out of 10 game. It also could have been number one, just like Sonic could have been number one. I'm telling you, every single game that's left on this list is legendary and absolutely exquisite. Streets of Rage 2, what a game. Absolute highest recommendation. Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Do I even have to tell you what a masterpiece this game is? That it was a complete expansion of everything great in Sonic 1? The characters, the animations, the graphics, you had Tails for the first time, they condensed zones into 2 acts, everything was fast and sophisticated. This has some of the most sublime zones in the history of the Sonic series. We all know about Casino Night, we all know about Chemical Plant Zone, we know about Wing Fortress. I loved every single zone. Goodness, every single iconic zone is in this game. It's phenomenal. This is the first time you could become supersonic. This is the first time you have to fight a Metal Sonic, at least the first representation of it. And the Robotnik boss battles became more epic and wild, and you got to go to outer space, and it was just phenomenal, man. Come on, Dev Egg, first time appearance. This is one of the greatest games of all time. Sega was already on the map. It was already fighting the great battle against Super Nintendo, and now Sonic 2 took it to a whole nother level. All those Nintendo fans who still weren't on board with Sega, once they got a taste of Sonic 2, they were like, see you later, Super Mario World. See you later, Super Nintendo. They were on board with us. This game was undeniably a masterpiece, a 10 out of 10 game. My goodness, I can go on forever about how much I love this freaking game. Every single zone is absolutely sublime. Even the 2-player mode, the squashed 2-player mode with the slowdown, even that was fun. It was such a great addition to the 1-player experience. We couldn't get enough. And the special stage, endlessly awesome special stage with this half pipe. Going after those rings, going after those Chaos Emeralds. One of the greatest games of all time, not just for Genesis, not just for 16 bits, but for all time, any system of any era. Wow. Sonic 2, 10 out of 10. NHL 96. I told you I was a big sports fan, but why NHL 96 and not 94 or 95? I mean, this game has all the features of the previous version, but what distinguishes NHL 96? Well, I'll tell you what. Now, this is the first year, the first edition where they had the create your own player feature. This was huge. Imagine putting yourself into a video game. I basically created myself and put myself into the starting lineup. I gave myself amazing physical abilities, great speed, great puck handling, great shooting ability. Then I stacked my own team with my brothers, my friends, my neighborhood buddies, everybody. I had a stacked team full of made-up players. A good friend of mine, I put him as this big fat goalie. I made the goalie much fatter and thicker in the game than in real life because I wanted him to block all the shots. I was a huge hockey fanatic at the time. It transcended its own genre of just the hockey titles, of just the sports titles. And let me tell you one fact, out of all the games that I played on the Sega Genesis, NHL 96 is single-handedly the game that I put the most hours into overall. No other game even compares. I mean, when you play a full season, you understand. I mean, I wasn't playing 20-minute periods, usually 5-minute periods or 10-minute periods, but still, it adds up. NHL 96 gets a 10 out of 10. Man, just give every game 10 out of 10. But hey, some are more deserving than others, right? And this is the one that really deserves it. Street Fighter 2 Special Champion Edition. Do you know how much we loved Street Fighter back in those days? But when we heard that the Genesis was gonna get Special Champion Edition, a game packed with more features than the Super Nintendo versions, a game that's going up right against Street Fighter 2 Turbo. It's got all the hyper fighting modes, it's got a group battle that the Super Nintendo doesn't even have. This is gonna be pound for pound a beast of a fighting game. I didn't have any money, obviously I couldn't own it. I was just a kid, but a friend of mine had it, and he kept letting me borrow it because he knew my enthusiasm for the game. And eventually it was my birthday and he just said, "Hey man, you love the game more than me. Just keep the game, dude, it's yours, it's your birthday." I can't believe I got this game. And I was just over the moon, and I was playing Street Fighter 2 at home. I had it. In many ways, this game is superior to Super Street Fighter 2 because the music and the sound quality is better. And I think it made more of an impact for me personally over time. I love Special Champion Edition more than Turbo on the Super NES. We needed this game in our life. And we had a Street Fighter 2 strategy guide with all the combo moves and everything. Like I said, I loved Bison, but I also loved Guile and Ryu and Ken and Chun-Li and Honda and Blanca and everybody. It was just an absolutely essential part of the Sega Genesis library. I mean, I don't know how I would have made it through 93, 94 without Street Fighter 2 Special Champion Edition. 10 out of 10, a legendary game. Wow.
Perfect. Hey. Round one, fight. Sonic
Number one, it is the one and only Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Did you really think it was going to be any other game? Don't you understand that I was there when Sonic was new? And this game is absolutely the climactic conclusion of the Sega Genesis Sonic trilogy. Sonic 3 and Knuckles combined that came out across 1994. I saw immediately that the game looked completely different from Sonic 2. Sonic's design, all the animations, the graphics in the level, everything looked different. And I was like, am I gonna like Sonic 3? I had no idea, I had concerns. All of our concerns were completely empty because this game was an unblemished, absolutely perfect masterpiece of a 2D platformer. The battery backup feature, the save your game feature. We needed save states, and finally Sega answered us. This was a gigantic adventure. It's like basically a blueprint for the Sonic Adventure games for Dreamcast, because the game was fundamentally much more open with a huge emphasis on exploration. You can play as Sonic, as Tails, as Knuckles, and you have this massive Angel Island to explore. And every act is 2.5 times as big as the acts in Sonic 2. Just think about how massive those levels are compared to a traditional 2D platform game like a Mario game. Sonic's levels are gargantuan. Let me tell you some of my favorite moments across this masterpiece. Hydro City Zone, an underwater zone like Labyrinth initially, right? Totally changes perspective on you because Act 2 is some of the fastest gameplay in the history of 2D games. And the music is absolutely stunning. Epic air battle with Robotnik, where Tails is carrying you and he's flying and you're just fighting this guy and he's zooming in and zooming out, and this was amazing. Ice Cap Zone. This is one of the greatest levels of all time in any Sonic game. The music is absolutely tremendous and sensational. Some people prefer Act 1, some Act 2. I love them both. One of my favorite levels ever in any Sonic game, in any game, period. Launch base, the battle against Robotnik when he's got those spikes and the big arms there at the end of it. Oh, that was a pretty epic battle with sinister music. Lava Reef. This is another legendary zone with an incredible build, incredible music, amazing graphics, epic battle against Robotnik right in the lava. Sonic and Knuckles team up, and Knuckles is basically your friend as he guides you as you're moving up and up into the clouds. We never got to explore Robotnik's sinister Death Egg in Sonic 2, but now we finally get to explore it in this gigantic, massive level full of so much interesting zero-gravity shenanigans, the Doomsday Zone. You're flying through outer space, you're chasing Robotnik, ending a 2D platform game through an epic space chase sequence, a definitive landmark conclusion. What a beautiful ending sequence. I'm gonna just go crazy right now. I'm gonna say this is the absolute greatest 2D platform game of all time. It transcends any 2D Mario game ever. Any platform game that you can think of. This is a game that's gonna live on in my consciousness, my video game memories forever. And every time I play it, I can relive my childhood. The absolute purity, the innocence, the sense of adventure, the sense of hope and idealism of childhood was completely represented by Sonic 3 and Knuckles. I don't think there's any game that compares to it in that sense. What a legend. Thank you for all the memories, Sega. Thank you for all the memories, Sonic Team, Yuji Naka, and everybody who had a participation in this epic adventure. You guys pulled a masterclass of 2D gaming on this one. This is a video game experience that has never been surpassed. This game will live on as a legend for all time. Sonic 3 and Knuckles, one of the greatest video games of all time. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure to like, comment, let me know what Genesis games you love, and don't forget to subscribe, because great men, our channel is always growing, we're taking over the world. And until next time, this is Albert Wesker, signing off.